Hey, and thank you so much for watching or listening to Urbanistica podcast. Today we have a really great episode with a great guest. I have the pleasure to welcome you, Tigran Haas, to Urbanistica podcast. Hey, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. Wonderful to be a I want to say a host on your program. No, to be a guest on your program. Finally, I'm so happy, and then congratulations on the podcast. It's just amazing.
Thank you so much, and I'm really happy to receive all your motivation and great words behind the scenes on social. So it's also a big pleasure for me that you're here as a guest. So thank you so much for giving your valuable time to record this.
Absolutely, absolutely. You got a jack in the box. You don't know what you're gonna get. Yeah.
So how are you? How are you?
It's okay. Yeah, I mean, I heard the other day they were discussing this. There was a very interesting epidemiologist, and he said, "Do not accept the new normal. There is no new normal, Mustafa. This is not normal. It's abnormal." So I think this is a phase that's going to pass, but a lot of lessons can be learned from this for
Yeah,
sure. For
yeah,
sure.
I can imagine. So how is it going with the teaching? Did you
Right.
adapt to the
Yeah.
situation?
My colleagues have been doing. I haven't had myself a lot of teaching because I've been running the center this last year or two, and our master's in urbanism has been closed. It finished its 5 years, so I think everybody has adapted pretty well. I think a lot of less good lessons can be learned, and that KTH can become an online university too in the coming years. So I think it's been good. Although face-to-face contact is very difficult
Yeah,
to
yeah,
replace.
yeah,
You've been at KTH alumni, so you know how it is.
yeah, yeah. So Tigran, you're our storyteller for this episode, and I would love to know more about you. So how would you like to introduce yourself? And please tell us about your passion.
Thank you. I want to say I would love to introduce myself as Richard Florida, the leading urbanist in the world, but I cannot do that. But my good friend, he doesn't do that actually. I'm an urbanist, Mustafa, and an architect by profession. Background from former Yugoslavia, US, and Sweden. Different degrees in ranging from architecture, urbanism, environmental science, and finally regional planning and infrastructure development. So I kind of cover from the micro to macro phases, which means I'm not an expert in anything, but at least I have a good view of the big picture.
Yeah, yeah.
So currently I am at KTH and directing the Center for the Future of Places. And yeah, definitely I'm passionate about good places, good urban places for sure.
Mm, mm. Can you tell me where did everything start in your journey in architecture, urban planning?
I think it was a long time ago. It was, the passion for architecture probably started with drawing as a little kid. So I wasn't really pushed into the university studies by my parents. They probably wanted me to study medicine. I wasn't interested in that, although I did go through a high school uh, biotechnology and pharmaceutical studies, and I worked 1 year in a pharmaceutical company. So
Wow.
I'm in love with pills, Mustafa. I appreciate pills. So if it wasn't architecture, I would have ended up in that. And then I think it was through drawing I got into architecture. But somewhere at the end of the architectural studies, after third, fourth year, I understood there's something more than objects. That there is the spaces in between, and that the cities are much more complex than just buildings themselves. So at the end, then I ended up in academia. I can't tell you why. Uh, those that can do, they teach, or those that can't even teach, they end up in somewhere. But it's been a long journey. Actually, the years have gone very fast. And also, I come from a post-conflict zone. Former Yugoslavia went through really bad times, as
Mm,
you might know. Some other areas like Iraq and like other places, East Timor, and so on. Now we've seen in Syria. So
yeah.
the PhD was done on post-conflict reconstruction. So I
Mm,
had that baggage and that experience for a number of years.
yeah, yeah. Very interesting journey. So if I would love to start this conversation with, can you explain to us what is urbanism?
A lot of people ask that, students foremostly, and then of course the term also varies from what culture you come from. If you come from France, or even from our cultures, you use that term. If you come from Germany, you probably use Städtebau, which is urban design, and the Americans use that too. But I would say urbanism for me, what I've learned it's really a twofold thing. And one is the way of life, which is characteristics to any town, city, or hamlet. But it's also the development and planning of cities and towns. So if you want to put it both together, I would say it's the study of cities, their geographic, economic, political, social, and cultural environment, and then the imprint of all these forces on the built environment.
Mm.
So it's that complex thing, and this is why you see so many people calling themselves urbanists, even though they don't have the background in architecture and urban design or urban planning.
Yeah, exactly. Because I noticed, like recently, many people working with so different other fields, as you mentioned, not really an architect or an urban planner, but
Sure.
as a call themselves as a urbanist. So I'd be like, okay, so what is it about?
So you can see, for example, Edward Glazer, Saskia Sass, and Richard Florida, to name a few of those high-sounding names. They're all called themselves urbanists, and
Mm-hmm.
people call themselves because they do study these forces in the city. Some at times from economic, political, or social geography perspective,
Mm.
human geography, environmental psychology. So a very complex thing, urbanism,
Yeah,
honestly.
and recently, like there's a sustainable urbanism, there is a new urbanism. Are they the same thing, one thing?
I was joking with the division meeting the other week, saying that I have a very good colleague of mine, Chris Jolson, who's a professor at Gothenburg University, and we were advocating or doing a number of papers on these isms, and we were kind of laughed out at some of the seminars. Oh, you isms people! But in academia, and I think it's been we try to conceptualize things, and then we try to give certain labels or names. I think it was Rem Koolhaas once said those architects, they're not able to come up with new theories. They're able at least to come with new terms. So there's so
Okay.
much, I'm sorry to use the words diarrhea of terminology, but there's different trends that you can sort of try to conceptualize in the cities. And it was Douglas Kelbaum, my former host at the University of Michigan, he was the dean there, that came up with a very influential paper almost I think 15 years ago, or 2005, which was called Three Urbanisms. And he sort of noted, in the Western, at least,
Mm.
in the US and Europe, he noted there were three main trends of the new urbanism, the sort of post or trans urbanism, and of everyday urbanism. I would now add the green urbanism, and then I finally add the re-urbanism, or let's call it the conventional urbanism. Something which adopts many styles and approaches, or
Mm-mm.
deals with high densification and so on. So there's a lot of things happening. Of course, the biggest term everybody uses and everybody adapts in cities is placemaking. So
Yeah,
you can
exactly.
even call that the main trend today. Everything is
Mm-mm.
placemaking, basically.
But tell me, like sustainable urbanism, is it the new urbanism as well, or what is the new urbanism?
Well, new urbanism was the term coined by a group of American architects and planners in 1990, in the late 90s, or late 80s. Later, it was really sort of got a real structure to the Congress of New Urbanism, where the charter was done and so on. It was a reaction to the rampant development of American suburbs. It was a
Mm.
reaction to huge exploitation of good rural land, of breaking the urban boundaries, of the suburban sprawl, domination of the automobile, lack of public
Mm.
transportation, destruction of green areas, climate issues, and so on, and even social housing.
Yeah.
So that term but it also became a very heated term because it was associated with neo-traditional development, which came from the East Coast by Andres Duani, and then it was coupled by the transit-oriented development of Peter Calthorpe. So architects didn't like it because it did promote return of the past,
Mm.
designing the past, promoted rather retrograde architecture at times. David Harvey called it the communitarian trap because it had a danger of spatial determinism. But of course, the communities that were built for specific people that signed up for that type of lifestyle.
Mm-mm.
So that was with new urbanism, which still lives today, and is actually a very multifaceted grain. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about it from micro, meso to macro scales.
Mm-mm.
New green or sustainable urbanism is there's different versions of it. If you take it from the new urbanism version, it's adopting the neo traditional neighborhood with different adaptive environmental technologies,
Mm.
thinking about density and so on. If you think about it more on I would say more holistic scale, my colleague Stefan Lehmann was a professor at Las Vegas. He was also very active in Australia. He would say that sustainable urbanism is really a framework which promotes quality of cities, environmental one, social one, economic, but also optimal density. So it's
Mhm.
like long-term viability by reducing consumption, waste, and harmful impacts on people, overall well-being, with a compact architecture. I mean, you could think of Hammarby Sjöstad as like maybe
Yeah.
a essential example of green urbanism. Maybe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you mentioned also placemaking. Do you see it as a trend now, or it's something new that we're gonna keep going with it, keep continuing
I
with?
think you'll probably find almost every city or municipality that advocates placemaking. All of these trends that I mentioned, they do it in a way. Before, placemaking was almost entirely connected to the Project for Public Spaces in New York.
Yeah,
Jan Gehl, ideas of Jane Jacobs, most of these observational urbanists. But now, I mean, I see placemaking as my colleague Mark Childs defined what is a quality of a certain place. He said it has to have civitas, which that means it has to have quality of how the community works.
yeah,
What is the social relationships? It has to have a genius loci, this famous term which was uh, revamped by Christian Norberg Schulz. Maybe you remember, you're an architectural student, Mustafa. This big thing of phenomenology of architecture in the late 80s,
mm,
which is really love for place or spirit of the place, our attachment. And finally, the urbanitas, the traditional built form. So
mm,
those where I think if you have those three, then you can start to talk about placemaking. But
mm.
you can have placemaking in the slums of Mumbai, and you can have placemaking in a very posh neighborhood in Washington, in Georgetown.
Yeah. And what are the other trends that you see that now we have it in our cities?
Well, I think it was. This is where we come to those isms, which are so dangerous. But as I said, Chris Drolson and I, we worked on this for almost a decade, and we wrote some papers and books on it. We see as the main five trends. I would still say there is this trend of, let's call it the green revolution trend of sustainable green landscape, all those green approaches to urbanism.
Yeah,
Either they could be, geared from ecological urbanism where technologies have the primacy, to things like earthship, uh, Michael Reynolds earthship, where you build everything from scratch from the waste you produce.
yeah,
So you have this closed loop. Then you have the re-urbanism, which we defined. This was defined by Robert Fishman, but never really fully developed. And that is a trend which you could see like in the North Station in Stockholm being developed, high density developments, leaning on specific historical examples, trying to be conventional, a little bit more futuristic. Sure. And then, of course, you have, if we take these five as the five major ones, you can always start adding the so-called post-urbanism or architecture, or trans-urbanism, as Arjun Mulder called it, transformation plus globalization, modernization plus okay, I forgot the fourth one now, but it's really sort of the architecture following the hyper flows of media technology, the changing faces of globalizing cities, and trying to be generic everywhere. So you find it everywhere from Dubai to Stockholm. Then and where architecture defines the space, it becomes a contextual piece of work and piece of art, which is dominant. Then, of course, the fourth one or third one, we talked about these clusters of green approaches. That was the one where we have the sustainable, ecological, green urbanism. You either go from where landscape urbanism starts from the nature, where nature tries to sort of repair the city in terms of like quintessential example of Highline, but you have tons of other projects where the new urbanists see it differently, that urbanism should repair urbanism, not nature should repair urbanism. Then the sustainable urbanism approaches of very similar cities in Europe, like Stockholm has Hammarby Sjöstad, you have the Hafen city, you have
mm,
the Linz solar city, you have, of course, the Royal Seaport, many of these places
mm,
around Europe, around the world. And then, of course, very bottom-up approaches of green urbanism dealing with waste of the, for example, the ship project of Michael Reynolds and other colleagues. Then the fourth trend would be the one which we talked about, the traditional development, the new urbanism one, which had different versions of it in around the world, and people didn't call it always new urbanism, but it was a traditional way of looking at cities, coming back to sometimes unfinished, uncompleted master plans, great buildings,
mm,
returned to high quality materials. And then, of course, you get results of in places like Seaside Celebration or Poundbury or Duplessis in
mm,
France and so on projects.
mm,
And finally, the last one would be That would be we had re-urbanism, post-urbanism, new urbanism, green urbanism, and the fifth one was new, post, green, and everyday urbanism, of course.
Okay.
The one that people adore now, and the one which is an umbrella. This term was coined by Margaret Crawford in 1999, and it really had to do with trying to create urbanism from bottom up, from the neighborhood level, where people were involved with either assistance of different professionals, but mostly it's just basically you, me, or anybody coming in and trying to do something on a temporary scale where you can try to tell the stories of a neighborhood, where there's a lot of narrative, a lot of things based on observation, and of course, then you DIY, do-it-yourself pop-up cities.
Yeah.
And then finally, the last one of I call it the Mike Leiden trend, the tactical urbanism one. So, and each of them really works on the place-making scheme. The PPS approaches, maybe they're very close to the last.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last two, exactly.
That's right. So I would say 5, but of course you ask anybody, and Jonathan Barnett wrote an article of 100 urbanisms, but sometimes as Michael Speaks, who was the dean, I'm not sure where Michael is right now, when he was participating in the debates in urbanism in Michigan, where I was, he basically said, in order to something to be called a trend or a paradigm, you can only look at new urbanism because it has an organization, it has principles, it has clear theories that it's based on, it has almost 1,000 projects that you can look at. So not everything can just be called an ism. If you can call it, Mustafa, you and me can give different names, but it has to have a body of knowledge and body of practice.
Because this is actually what I wanted to ask you. Like you mentioned so many different, I would say, or ism. So what makes it how to say, a new movement or a new, let's say, trend?
Sure. I mean, I don't. Either they do come from academia, like landscape urbanism came from University of Pennsylvania, and UPenn came from a number of architectural schools, and then it spread into practice. Or it can come from practice, like new urbanism came from practitioners like Peter Calthorpe, a planner, and an architect, Anders Duani, and then it penetrated the academia. Or it can, come from a combination of things. But in order to call something a paradigm, as I said, really you have to have a good body of knowledge behind it. You have to have a number of years. Same with disciplines. Now people are always saying, well, is urban design a discipline? I think it is. If you say there is enough carrying capacity and mass of professionals that adhere to specific principles. There is schools that teach people urban design. You get out with degrees, you're certified. So it's same with these trends, but then when they become, although if you ask Rem Koolhaas or you ask the late Zaha Hadid or Frank Gehry, do you feel yourself as a post-urbanist? They would say, absolutely not. I'm an architect and maybe I'm a deconstructivist, maybe. But that's how it is.
Yeah, very interesting. So, and how is it now? Are we going to keep doing the same, developing our city in the same way, like thinking about, or are we gonna do it in a new way?
$1 million question, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I was on the bandwagon when it started. Said, "Whoa, let's jump into the ship and let's go like Vikings and plunder the first city that we see." But I think when the dust settles, what I've noticed, there's a couple lessons I learned from this first wave.
Yeah.
Number one, people are so difficult to change their points of view, Mustafa. They're so embedded in their trenches. So if I'm a traditionalist, if I'm a density freak, I will not give that for any COVID outside. I'll still believe in it. People that have been pro-sprawl, pro-suburban, they would say, look at this, we have told you. We told you the density is bad. Now we can prove this with this. So there's these trenches, and I think now we'll have to start thinking what are the best combination of things. I think Richard Florida said it very well. On a macro, there will be changes on a macro and a micro level. On a micro level, cities will probably adapt a little bit and come back to the old format things in due time when the dust settles. You know how it is. We're so human. When you have a terrorist attack on an airport, the security is terrible for the first year, and then later on they just move your hand and
Yeah.
basically you can take whatever, you can take a cow through the and then nobody will see it. So but on the macro things will have to change from the regional scale to the neighborhoods. And of course I think big change will also have to be seen in the social sectors of the cities, our relation to the health sector, our relationship to the public administration, and of course to the public realms. How do we behave and do things in public realms? Yeah.
Mhm.
Self-sufficiency also, we have seen now the micro scale, micro local economies, food that has been brought from the
Yeah.
hinterlands. A lot of things have been very positive in this thing.
Yeah, but do you think we learn and we're gonna do, or we just okay learning, but then when everything is when Corona is when we are done with Corona, we will just go back to how we used to plan cities and develop cities. What do you think? Are we gonna really to do what we learned?
I'm a little bit more pessimistic. I think because you're fishing out this from me. I think we're not going to learn that much. There's going to be a lot of, if we get back to the normal economic levels like before, if the real estate sector starts to boom again, a lot of lessons will not be learned. But this will vary from city to city. I think the certain lifestyles and certain approaches to living in cities will change. So it will very much come to us. I think now I've started to appreciate smaller mid-sized cities, maybe even hamlets. Not saying that everybody has to flee cities,
Yeah.
but I think densification almost there was a I'm not sure if it came out from the late Michael Zorkin, but somebody said that we need some kind of a sensitive or more lighter densification discussion, sort of
Mm,
light density, not this hard density. So we're going to learn, but we're also going to forget for
mm.
sure.
Who's responsible to keep these learned lessons on the side, that when we develop, we should really act from what we learned from Corona?
It's going to be this new generational planners that are in place and that are coming in. I mean, the students, people that are a little bit younger than me and you, and also us. I mean, for example, you remind me of a voice in war times, sort of like you're going to continue to spread the news. So it's going to go from podcasts or from urbanists to local municipality planners to decision makers, and again to some are brighter minds. But of course, if it's nothing is done in policy, if it's not translated into new housing policies and new real estate development policies, then it's going to be really problematic.
Mm, mm.
We need to remember what has happened and what can we learn from this, because we have gone through different catastrophes. We have had everything from different pandemics, tsunamis. New York has felt the 9/11, and of course there's been big discussions after that. I remember my colleagues Peter Mercuse, Setalov, Susan Fine, they all discussed, now is going to be change, Stephen Graham. And then when the dust settled, that was almost forgotten. What did we get? We got a new tower even higher than the two Yamasaki ones, right? So things did change and they did not change. But I think we need to remember what we have learned now.
Yeah. And are there many researches done about COVID and city development? And how is it from your side, academia?
I think I try to follow what I can because there's been an extreme explosion of articles about COVID-19 planning and urbanism right now. And it's also been connected to people working with smart cities and trying to get, looking at how smart technologies can trace different pandemics, how technology can help in these situations. There's been a lot of you have a lot of medical papers coming out with the consequences of COVID-19 with the number of patients, because you need to have a sample.
Yeah.
We don't use those samples when we write about urbanism. We just throw this based on certain statistics. So I think we'll need a little bit of samples when the time settles down. Most of the writing has been about densification and about the demons of density in cities, but also about the greatness of how cities can survive this. So I would say still a very modest number of academic papers is coming out, because I understand that it's also very difficult to do real research on the ground right now. But a lot of popular science papers have been out there, a lot.
Very interesting. And you mentioned smart. This is also a great bridge to the next question about smart city. As you know, like in Urbanistica, we talk smart city and what is a smart city. So from your side, based on your journey, how do you define a smart city?
Yeah, if I had my colleague Matthias Heyer or Andy Carvinen here, they would probably give you a better answer. I would say I see it now also connected to the new new discipline or urban science that has just emerged at MIT some years back. Combination of I'll come back to that, but really smart cities in general, you would say it's a city that uses technology to provide services and solve city problems. So it's basically technology trying to solve the problems we have.
Mm.
And that means improving transportation and accessibility, improving social services, promoting sustainability, and giving its citizens a voice. So it's not a new idea. I mean, you go back to the Roman times, you find these concepts, right?
Yeah.
Even from the aqueducts and drainage systems, those were smart solutions for cities when it comes to waste and water. But I would say improving policy efficiency, reducing waste, social economic quality, and then maximizing social inclusion. And when you add the incredible possibilities of modeling that we have right now, that basically, I mean, things that are being done like with the Sensible Lab in MIT and even the project at KTH, where you can sort of look at these geospatial data and then do extremely interesting forecasting and modeling studies, then you would see that there's a lot of possibility. But again, I would say the technology cannot really replace real urbanism at the end of the day. Like technology cannot replace energy when it comes to the climate change crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember this reminded me when James Howard Kunstler was in Google. He gave a speech. He's a very interesting, controversial speaker and a writer. And then all these dudes in Google, they had this hats back, and then he gave this lecture about the end of the world after the oil peak and the long emergency, and what are we going to do when the fossil age ends? And one of the guys said to him, "You know what, dude? I don't buy any of this. We got technology, man. We don't need energy at all." And I think this is the trap we might fall in, thinking we got technology for cities. We don't really need urbanism. But I think we're going to need both, Mustafa.
Yeah. And do you feel that we are living in a smart city? You have been in so many different cities. Do you really feel that, okay, this is a really smart city based on how you describe a smart city?
I think, when we look at Sweden and in terms of when you travel to other countries, in terms of digitalization and modernity, as we like to call things here, Sweden is running at a very high pace. You would probably expect in a lot of countries that maybe sustainable transportation would be more smarter, that we would see more autonomous vehicles, we would see more autonomous systems, we would see more personal mobility systems in place, as William Bill Mitchell called it. I mean, these things have been on drawing boards for almost 2-3 decades. So there, I think we would expect much more to see. Smart homes, sure, you will see a lot of smart homes in different cities, although a lot of these things are not adapted to the aging society. I think there's a segment of society you saw now. I think every country has failed in a way to protect its aging population in COVID. So if we can't protect them from a simple virus or a complex virus, how the hell are we going to make these, smart homes for people that are over 70 or 80 years old? And then, of course, you would see things in 5G nets and telecommunications, as Stephen Graham and Simon Martin wrote about, the sort of the telecommunications in cities are exploding. So that type of urbanism, definitely. So, I mean, when you look at the cities are a complex beast. And of course, I always say cities are, if you play poker, you're dealt, either you get a good hand, Mustafa, or you fight for it.
Yeah,
Some damn cities are so fortunate. They have great access to water, natural resources, right?
Yeah.
Some poor cities, like, for example, Las Vegas, for God's sakes, it doesn't have anything. So then you have to, deal your cards and get the best thing out of it. So in that sense, it's going to be no cookie cutter solutions. I think every place is going to be very unique, how you adapt the smart city concept.
Yeah.
But of course, one has to be careful that it doesn't become this sort of technological determinism. That this is, look at these living labs and things that just failed in I think it was in Toronto, right? That thing wasn't going according to what it was supposed to. So there is still a lot of reservations, and I think we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and you mentioned also that a smart city is not only about technology. We still need the urbanists. But because people developing the technology, we as urbanists not really in touch with them. So how do we put these two together in order to create a smart city?
Yeah, well, one of the things there's been an excellent that was related a little bit to the COVID-19. What I wanted to mention now, and I'll come back to the smart cities. This organization, which is called ISOCARP, International Organization of Regional and City Planners around the world, they put a number of interesting themes of that we as planners should think about when the COVID passes. And one of them was the smart protection versus the fear of surveillance. So in a sense, now we had the surveillance, and we're going to have even more in order to track people. The strategies to combat COVID-19 has been using intelligence toolbox, tracing individuals and their contacts. And then, of course, then you have the issues of privacy. How is that dealt in the city? Then digital platforms as viable communication tools, online shopping, physical mobility, things on energy. So if it doesn't encroach on our privacy and on sort of, I would say, humanistic living, then of course technology is great as a
Mm.
tool and as a complement. But if it takes over, it's going to be a very, very difficult thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And do you teach like a smart city concept when you like in KTH or
Oh,
academia?
I always in lectures I say, well, this will be taken up by my colleague Andrew Carvin or Matthias Heyer. So just wait for their course and they'll tell you all about it. But I would say, no, we have actually very much the digitalization platform at KTH is growing exponentially. And there's more people interested in that from different disciplines, human geographers. I would say at the first glance I see there's a lot of human geographers, environmental scientists coming in. And I think they're teaching the students now uh, very much the new urban science discipline and also how to develop smart, intelligent, but also inclusive cities.
Mm,
So I think the new generations of, let's say, SUPD students they're going to get more and more of this. I'm sure of that for
mm,
sure.
mm. Do you think it's good?
I think it's definitely good. You need to get the. This is why MIT now came with a program where they wanted to mix. This is, I think, the most unique program in the world right now. It's a bachelor's program where they mix computer scientists, social scientists, and architects and planners.
Wow.
So learning, computer people learning from planners and vice versa. I think it's an incredible combination. So that people that deal with data, we talked about big data quite a lot, but a lot of people really don't know what that is and how to use it. So we're going to need new interdisciplinary studies, Mustafa, and I think hopefully KTH is moving to that, where you
Mm.
also bring issues of mobility and also environmental science, sort of, three or
Yeah.
four
Yeah, exactly.
foundations.
Because this is what I noticed when I graduated from SUPD that in the real life, you're dealing with so many different stakeholders. You're not dealing with the urban planners anymore.
No,
So, like, you need to talk like with so many people that who are not urban planners or architects.
I think you're right, and maybe that's another course. I mean, there is elements of urban governance and issues of policy making in certain courses, but maybe there should be almost a compulsory course. How do you deal with actors on the ground when you finish as a planner, an urban designer, or an architect? So that complexity of dealing with multiple actors and from real estate. I mean, in the US, you'll find these issues tackled either in legal courses or in real estate courses, but in a lot of times I've seen them, they're not very successful. It's very difficult to teach this, but I think it's needful if you need to
Yeah,
start
yeah,
working. You need
yeah,
this.
exactly. And in the end, like it's more about like that you should experience it also to understand what is the theory about. So like it's not really enough with having a guest lecture or
Absolutely, absolutely. No,
Mm.
that those are the big things, and I think one big thing that will remain with us forever, and I think we are very very low and slow on that everywhere. It's housing transformations, issues of housing research. We have good individuals, but we still don't have centers or clusters of work, and that also deals the issues of racism and segregation and exclusion. These things need to be taught, and they
Yeah,
need to be also. There are also very Latin words and loaded terms and loaded themes. But if you don't talk about racism openly, you're never going to solve any of the issues. I mean, fortunately, in the US now, we have seen things have come up, at least at the surface, for all the wrong reasons. with the leadership that was not good in anywhere. But at least they've come up. And now if they disappear again, then you haven't really achieved anything.
Mm.
So I think we will start to need that. Although I think we do discuss. I mean, you guys come out from KTH is very critical per people, and I think there was a couple. One of my students said to my colleague Alexis Pontic, who finished. He said, I'm so critical of everything. I'm so, but I don't. I still don't know how to draw. I don't know how to do buildings. Okay. So, but Lars Marcus, my colleague, has been talking about this for years, and he just gave a very nice talk on the Formas SDG 11 conference. He also talked about the position of our disciplines. Who is responsible for what? Mustafa, if you say today, I'm doing city development, what does that mean? Are you doing town planning? Are you doing city planning? Are you doing real estate development? Are you doing, DIY? What are you doing? Are you a social worker? So in a sense, I'm not saying that we need the silos to be silos still, but I think we need to know who's doing what. And I think that's still problematic, even in academia, when we send people out. When you are a finished urban planner, city planner, and you think, okay, so, what am I actually?
Yeah.
Who am
But
I?
yeah, it's also like I had this question when I graduated. I'd be like, okay, so what should I do now? Because the market is like really big and there's so many things to do. It's not like the same before that. You're architect, you can keep being an architect, like practice, do the things that you learn. So now the market is bigger, and I think it's more complex now as well.
That's very well said. I think you nailed the right thing. And in that complexity, what are you really supposed to be specialist in?
Yeah,
You're going to go for the real estate sector. That means, I have to do another master's in real estate development, right? Public administration. I have to do an MBA.
Yeah.
Environmental science. Oh gosh, another master's program, or take a 2-3 week course. So it's difficult, and I think this is the I would say the curse and the blessing of urbanism. You're a generalist, but you're also a specialist, and you're none of those two. So that's very but when we look at people like Richard Florida, for example, and Ed Glazer, they will tell you we are urban economists in our essence. So I will tell you, if you ask me, I'll say I'm an architect. I finished architecture and planning, so that's the perspective I look from. So I think we need to keep that, last rope when you're climbing Mont Blanc, so it doesn't really cut you off. That's the link to our first discipline. That's still so important.
I think it's also very important, especially now, like I'm working with many stakeholders. It's very important to identify, okay, who is going to work with what and why, instead of saying, yeah, you're a planner, you fix it. But at the same time, as you mentioned, like we're in between, we cannot fix everything.
No.
So it's an interesting, how to say, it's an interesting journey to find your niche.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And I think, just to come back to your question before, that I probably didn't answer, what lessons did we learn from COVID? There's many, but the biggest question we need to ask ourselves, do we need a new ideal or a paradigm for the city or not? So do we need a less consumerist society? Less travel, right? Less possessions. When I look at the apartment, what I have, I would love to just burn 90% of the things I have. Sometimes I'm ashamed. I would like to cut on travel 70%. Do we need a different urban setting, Mustafa? Do I need to live in hamlets or core cities or whatever? What about the local industries and the supply chains? I mean, people sometimes forget, but cities are like our bodies. They're like organisms that need proteins, they need sugars, they need I want to say cholesterol. They need all kinds of things in order to work. So this is with the cities too. And then, of course, engagement and accountability in local communities. Again, to the politics, what kind of transformations? And finally, I think the biggest problem for me, or the biggest issue, would be, how do we change our lifestyles and cultures? Will the culture and lifestyle change after this? I talked to a lot of my friends, and there's a group of them, they're just waiting for this to end to go back to the same.
Yeah.
And the others have been, almost with psychological problems. So we're going to have a lot of problems afterwards.
I think so. It's going to be a kind of friction between different groups.
For sure. And I think finally we need to put a lot of money into the medical sector. I mean, these people have been heroes, but also the research on health sciences, life sciences, that we can eradicate simple or even more complex viruses. I think imagine if they would tell us as urbanists, and you tell them, Mustafa, and they say, can you make a road here and with a tram? That's impossible. Take a bike or a horse. That's like, I'm sorry, this is a complex virus. It will take 15 years to find out. No, we've got to have these answers fast. Look at the AIDS virus. I mean, we're still combating AIDS. We
Yeah.
haven't solved cancer. Alzheimer, of course, that's even more complex. So I think health sciences really need to, and that means also connection with us, health sciences and us. They need to also learn how the cities function from
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And do you collaborate in KTH? Do you collaborate with different stakeholders in order to work about, or in order to teach or to do things related to city development?
We did through, I mean, this last year, 5 years of the center, of course, we have been mostly collaborating within academia, but also with United Nations, UN Habitat, and with some NGO groups. I would say our biggest collaboration in project has been with different disciplines. I mean, when we did the huge aging society and geography of age, we collaborated with health uh, scientists, with medical researchers, with human geographers, urban sociologists. When as I mean, in our what I would say, in when I was running the master's program for the last 5 years in urbanism, one of the problems I would say, if we had something that was not good, it was the lack of real place making schemes on the ground, working with municipalities on a specific projects during a long time with a number of stakeholders. And due to a number of reasons, we did it with always, but it was always a piecemeal thing. It was never something that resulted in, like, in you guys getting jobs afterwards or presenting to the
Mm-hmm.
municipality in a way that would transform the municipality's work. So again, that thing from academia, I would say they're very, very successful. And of course, I apologize to some of my colleagues that are doing a better job in that. But in the US, they're very successful in working with neighborhoods and with different municipalities. So almost each course has to be practice oriented and has to do
Yeah.
some transformation in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I
Very.
think we still have a long way to go there.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Now we're talking about the future. So, if I ask you, if we go back in time with a time machine, and you're allowed to change one thing related to research and teaching at universities, what will you change?
I want to say, I thought you were going to ask me if I can go back and see what the lottery is going to be in 2016. What I would change with universities and change with research, that is an extremely complex question. If you would do, depending, where would I want to land the time machine, in which year? Of course, my first term would be to go there and see if we can prevent the Second World War or the bombs or things like that. But
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe if I would go back in terms of, and I'm looking now from the disciplines of urban planning, urban design, and architecture, I think the interesting period would probably be to go in the beginnings of modernism. And when we moved to the industrial city and see, okay, that this is when we had a lot of very complex research. I mean, when you look at the housing done during the so-called international style modernist period, it was an extremely uh, humanistic, I would say, endeavor to create social housing for those people that were really in a bad position. And this is what Nathan Glazer said, a famous, he died a few years back, famous American sociologist that worked around. He was a conservative, but he was an extremely intelligent person writing about race in the US. And he said, the social agenda of architecture and planning disappeared today. We had a huge social agenda back then. And I would probably go there and see what we could learn from that agenda they had, which again, in many ways had disastrous consequences when it came to specific urban forms and the gestalting of public realms and so on. As you know, I mean, look at our suburbs. There are very complex issues. There's 11, 12, 15, 20 different issues, from management to segregation to urbanism. But I would probably try to learn from those modernists when they were doing these things, what we could sort of move to here. In terms of research, um, I don't want to stop time, Mustafa. Everything had to happen for a reason. Everything is
Mm.
in its historicity. So I wouldn't meddle with time. I think I don't know. I would go there, but I would probably stay so I could be a little younger. But I don't think I would go forward or backwards. It's a difficult question. I don't think I would use the time machine. I would just leave it to serendipity and to synchronicity and to
Yeah.
things that would just happen.
Mm.
But I would try to tell people, watch out. There's going to be a pandemic in 2020, so please do something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very, very interesting answer,
But
actually.
if I could answer you for that, I would
Yeah.
probably see how could we work with social housing? How could we really enable people to get housing for equitable, just housing for all? Because for housing for me has been throughout my whole career and the number one thing of all. Really,
Mm, mm.
if you have good house, everybody should. I mean, it's a human right.
Yeah,
Parking is not a
yeah.
human right. Owning a car is not a human right. Having the latest Armani jacket is not a human right. But having adequate, good, sustainable housing, it is.
Mm.
Honestly,
I
yeah.
totally agree with you. Yeah. And yeah, through your journey, you have been in so many different cities. Uh, Now, if I ask you, what is your favorite city? Which city will you pick?
Hey, Mustafa. I had this discussion when I was doing my postdoc at MIT with late William Mitchell at the Media Lab, or the design lab he formed in 2005. I came into his room and I was exalted and said, Bill, the Mercer Consulting rankings just came out. The three most cities popular for the quality of life are Zurich, Geneva, and Vienna.
Yeah.
I love Zurich. And he said, by God, Tigran, those are the most boring cities on the planet. Where's Bangkok? Where's Tokyo? Where's London?
Yeah.
So I think it's for a number of reasons. I would say like this: if let's say I choose Zurich, the only problem I see with Zurich is, of course, the cost of living. I think that's something which is problematic in Switzerland. But it is this size of the city, which is up to 500,000. It is the closest of nature. It is the security and sort of the softness of edges. It's the history that the city has. It's the cultural life that it gives. There is a specific sense of place. Even if you're not from Zurich, you can feel at home. So I would probably opt for a city like that. That would be my number one choice. And it
Mm.
doesn't matter if it's Zurich. It could be in any other country. But I would
But
probably
this model, yeah.
I think that model that it has, and of course, if you remember, Zurich has the best public transportation in the world, maybe aside from Singapore or Bangkok, and it's because they started working on it in the 1970s. They put
Mm.
everything in public transportation, and it proved to be extremely good. So I think I would like to get that combination of good elements of good quality of life.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I would opt for Zurich for sure.
Very interesting answer.
Honestly, that's my
To be
honest
honest,
answer.
I didn't expect that you're gonna answer with Zurich.
Oh, you were expecting I'm probably going to say Lagos in Nigeria, right? That's another fascinating,
Yeah,
incredible city.
yeah,
But
yeah.
after now this COVID thing, I'm still a huge believer in cities, but on a different scale.
And yeah, I can imagine. And what is your favorite public space then? Like the one that you would love to be there, like every time you wake up in the morning, be like, I want to go there.
I think it was in the period when I was going through different transformations. There was a period where I was very much romanticizing the public realms, and I was in love with the squares like Piazza del Campo in Siena and Piazza Navona or Piccadilly Square or whatever, sort of these things. And I would say Piazza del Campo in Siena is absolutely an amazing public realm. It's because of so many interesting levels of it. But I would say probably in this period of my life now, I would be very content with like little small neighborhood squares in Barcelona or in Stockholm if they were well taken care of, well
Yeah.
cared for. There's a number of very nice public spaces. There's a beautiful little square in the town where I grew up in Philadelphia. It's called I'm not sure if Federation Square is in Portland, but this one is called. It's built for the blue collar community in Philadelphia and tells a story. And built by the famous people you might know, Venturi, Scott, and Brown, the ones that wrote the last Learning by from Las Vegas. A beautiful little square that you feel very relaxed in. Nature has sort of come in, so something that gives a sense of place on a more intimate scale.
Mm.
I mean, of course, Highline is a beautiful place, but not everybody's in. Not not everybody has the same taste. You know how the
Yeah,
old
yeah, yeah.
say, "De gustibus non disputandum est." You don't really discuss, debate tastes.
Mhm.
Each of us has a different perception. But of
Yeah.
course, there's some essential qualities, Mustafa, that we should appreciate and accept.
Yeah.
By the way, when I mentioned learning from Las Vegas, was Rem Koolhaas said there's only three treatises written on architecture that are worth reading. That's Jane Jacobs's The Death and Life of Great American Cities, Learning from Las Vegas, and of course Rem's Delirious New York.
Mm, mm, mm.
So those three books for our listeners. Rest you can just burn. No, don't burn. Read. But these three
Yeah,
actually very
the
interesting
prior, yeah,
treatises.
yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with you. So, Tigran, apart from all the urbanism and teaching and doing research, what are your hobbies?
Honest, my hope is a very embarrassing thing. The children's book I've been working on for almost 20 years. It's done. It's a 2-volume book of my childhood. And now I'm going to try to get it through a real editor and then send it for publication if it gets published.
Wow.
And so I become a best-selling author, and then I can just retire Mustafa in Zurich in a small cottage. No, sure. Sometimes a lot of my friends say you're a combination of Peter Pan and Walter Mitty. If you've seen the movie about Walter Mitty, you can imagine. I mean, the guy sees many things, none of them ever happen. So the book, I want to do that.
Will I get a copy signed
Absolutely.
by
You
the
get a
author?
copy. If it's only 2 copies published and it's sold out, you'll get one of those 2.
Thank you so much. So this was your hobby.
This was my hobby, and of course there was some other stuff, but this was the big hobby I had, and it's finally done. And it's an interesting book because it covers a period in a former Eastern European city, living in a tower. And it's not very negative of towers, you could believe it. I spent most of my life living in towers, so I have a very interesting, I would say, perception and connection to high rises.
Yeah.
There's very negative things about them, absolutely, but there's also very positive things.
Yeah.
So
And I would love to ask you now, when you publish the book, we need an episode about the book and a bit of content about it.
Sure, but you would have to have the PG-21 or something, parents yeah, and the restricted or these disclaimers. Parents have your children. It's it's kind of a little rather dark stories, but I think there's 2 or 3 of them that deal with urbanism, kind of. So which would be good for your program.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this episode, to be honest.
Thank you so much.
So it was very inspiring to talk with you, and I believe that this is a first episode of coming other episode as well.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. And I want you really, you and I should do a new manifesto for urbanism. We should come up with a new manifesto.
Yeah. So I would love to ask you to finish this episode with 3 takeaway messages to the listeners.
Number 1, quoting, rephrasing Bjarke Engels, that cities are never finished. Cities are theaters for people to come in, people to come in and change things, to transform things. So they are always like a theater in a way. They're never finished and they're never completed. That's one of the takeaways. We can't have them as museums. Number 2, places matter. Actually, good places matter, because they have multiple spin-off effects in economics, in psychological, social and psychological aspects, in political sense, and so on. And number 3, the number 3 takeaway would be, never believe everything the smart cities people tell you. Be careful.
Yeah.
Be careful.
I love this one, because that's why I started the podcast. It's so dangerous to listen to.
It is
and believe.
Yes, but when they really come down to the implementation thing, you'll see they get into hurdles. It's not all that easy. It's not a sprint of 100 meters. Very complex.
Yeah. Well, a great takeaway messages. And do you have a question to the listeners that they will reflect about?
I would say, again, I'm not stealing this idea, but it's an idea from James Howard Kunstler. He said it a number of years ago when he did his famous TED Talk on suburbia. I would say, because I've been a consumer quite a lot of my life, and I'm very ashamed of that, Mustafa. I'm at least I've confessed my sins. I've penance, that we need to start to become real citizens in a way. And it's not just caring for the other, for your neighbor and so on, but really caring for your cities and communities in a way. Trying to say, well, I'm not going to travel so much this year. I'm going to work in the neighborhood. I'm going to do something for this. I'm going to do more in a global, become a globalist in a way. And not saying that we are going to stop globalization, not at all, but really taking away, can we be better citizens that we are better consumers, that we are consumers right now?
Yeah.
So maybe that to all the audience.
I think it's very important and interesting question. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mustafa. And I'll tell this to Apple, please stop producing these phones. It's enough with these 11, 12, 13. When are we going to stop? As soon as you
Yeah.
get 11, there's 12 now. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah, exactly.
I like
Exactly.
my four was so good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And do you have three hashtags for the episode as well?
Um, well, one will be, of course, placemaking, right? The second one will be urbanism. And the third one will be cities. So
Very very easy.
I'm too simple. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
simpleton. Yeah.
Less is more.
Less is more. Yeah. Well, I don't use that one anymore. But I mean, somebody told me if you really want to get seen, you need to put these controversial hashtags out that have nothing to do with your stuff, and then something. But
Yeah.
that's dangerous because
Yeah,
then
that's
you can get in
dangerous.
real trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is going to be the next step for you?
Well, we are finishing this Center for the Future of Places. We've done quite a lot, and we'll come with a lot of products next year. We've done a lot of events and so on. We have a big conference I would say in June or September, and I hope to have you there to do a lot of podcasts. We're going to
Yeah.
have all these famous people. Will it be online? I have a feeling it might. Much easier to get all these people online.
Yeah.
And after that, I think I would like to move. Actually, this was an idea for the ending of the center, which we didn't manage to do. We had our major research team was Cities for All and Who Owns the City. The next step, I would really like to get into humanizing smart cities. That's the topic I would like to. If I continue with a smaller lab, I think that's going to be the next step for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. And yeah, I'm happy to talk with you. I'm very inspired by you, and hopefully we're gonna talk more in about other topics. So thank you so much, Tigran.
Feelings mutual, Mustafa. Thank you, and good luck with this fantastic podcast. It's
Thank
doing
you.
really good. Take care and have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.